In our previous videos, we've been looking at calculating financial ratios, and we're looking at it from the perspective of how well are we able to fund our operations. So we are going to be using those Industry Canada or the competitors' collective financial ratios to compare to how our organization is operating. So we need to talk about the idea of benchmarking. So this is where we search for the best practices among competitors that will then improve our performance. We can benchmark against ourselves, so we can compare to how we've been doing in the past, and we want to show improvement, or we can set our goals in terms of the competitors. So we need to really connect our best practices to strategies and goals, which means we first have to identify what those best practices are. And we can look throughout our organization at our best practices and set our standards there. We can look at the competitors and compare to that. And so we're identifying our best practices. We're developing a way to reward and recognize when we meet those best practices and communicating them throughout the organization. So when we look at the idea of benchmarking, it aligns with strategic planning. And we're actually going to talk about some strategic planning in some later videos, so we'll come back to this strategic map. But we're looking for alignment in terms of mission, vision, and values, who we see ourselves as, what we are trying to accomplish, what we're trying to be. And we need to align that with what our goals are. And we then need to create strategies to obtain those goals. And we need to measure with metrics how well we are doing at obtaining those goals. So the place that the benchmarks come in is in terms of the goal and measuring our performance related to that goal in what we're going to call a balanced scorecard. So when you do strategic mapping, there are 4 general areas that you look at. So financial, that's why we're talking about it here, tying into this financial component. We can also look at it in terms of the customer experience. We can look at our processes. So that's what we talked about in some previous videos, was process design. So the steps we take to make our good and provide our service. And we can also look at the perspective of learning and growth. So this is innovation. And how are we able to build as an organization into new areas and develop our people and their strengths. So what we do in terms of strategic planning is we set those goals. So we have financial goals, customer-based goals, one's based on process and one based on innovation and growth. And then what we need to do is we need to define how we're going to measure our ability to meet those goals. We call those KPIs, or key performance indicators. And we're going to need a strategy, some tactics, an action plan for getting to that. So we're going to come back to this strategic map in later videos. But our focus right now really is on that benchmarking component that comes part of this. But before we leave the strategic maps, just some common mistakes that happen is that we focus only on operational goals and not on goals from all the different aspects of our organization. Our goals don't have connections, right? The key with strategic planning is really about alignment. We need to have a rationale as to why these are our goals, why we're working towards them, how they help meet that mission vision. And we recognize that we need to have metrics that are not lagging, that don't tell us about what happened in the past, but we can continue to look at as we monitor our performance. We also don't want to have too many goals. We want them to tie in together. So we'll come back to strategic planning, but the focus right now really is on the benchmarking. And so we're going to use a balanced scorecard to look at how well we're doing versus that goal. So this scorecard is a performance measurement tool, and the typical scorecard has those 4 areas on it. So I'll just show you, here is a scorecard, and you can see finance, which is kind of our focus right now, the customer perspective in terms of, is it the quality they want, is it timely? Processes, we could look at our supply chain in terms of how we're working with other companies to make our good and get it out to customers. We could look at our process in terms of how we make the particular product. We also have a section here of learning and growth, which looks at the information that we have in terms of development of new methods and ways to do things, and as well as the skills of our workforce. So in fact, that learning and growth is the people, the innovation, and sources that we create that can lead to future growth. We're going to focus here mostly on finance for now, but in terms of strategic planning, we would do this for the entire organization. So what we need is to have a general strategy, our key performance indicator, how we're going to measure that, and then what's our goal. And so the goal often comes from these benchmarks. So our comparison to industry or where we would like to see ourselves, and then we compare to where we are to date. So when it comes to key performance indicators, we need a quantifiable measurement. So we need a number. And we need to be able to do a calculation so we can see our number currently versus where we want to be. So this might be the amount of revenue you're creating per your client. This might be revenue growth. This might be your profit margin. Maybe we're looking at client retention rates. So how well are we able to keep our client? And then they're going to keep coming back to us. If we were looking at more of that customer's perspective rather than the financial one, we could look at customer satisfaction scores. So we could survey our customers as to whether they would recommend us to other people. How satisfied are they? Maybe it's on a scale of 1 to 5. And so we could look at the average score and say, well, we'd like to be a 4 out of 5. We're currently a 3 out of 5. That might be our comparator here. If we're back looking at more of the financial ones, we could look at our current ratio, our assets to liabilities. We could look at debt to equity. We could look at accounts payable in terms of who we owe and how well we're doing at paying back those people that we owe money to. So examples of a scorecard. So we could look at, in terms of our finances, we could look at reducing our costs. So you can see here our objective or goal is to become the industry cost leader. So we're looking at percentage reduction in cost per unit. So can we make the cost of goods sold go down per unit? Our goal is 20. We're currently at 10. And so we can give ourselves a score of 50%. This score comes from the result to date, 10%, divided by our goal of 20%. Maybe our focus is to increase revenue by increasing the market share. Maybe our goal is to have 50% of the market, that is of the customer base, 50% buy from us and 50% buy from the competition. And so far we're at 40%. So our score would be 40% divided by 50% gives us how well we are in terms of reaching that goal of increasing market share. As we said, the full scorecard includes not just financial aspects, but customer aspects. And so we could have quality. So what's the percentage of, if in our production process, that pass first inspection? We'd like all of the goods to pass first inspection. We're currently at 80%. So of course the score is 80%. In terms of on-time delivery being our goal, we could look at the percentage of times we are able to deliver on time. We recognize that there's things that impact that ability. So we're going to set a goal of 95%. Currently we're at 90%. We would take our 90% divided by 95% to get that score. When you are doing the full balance scorecard, you can actually look at it by area. So we have finances, customer, processes, innovation, and growth. And you can calculate a mean performance. So the mean performance comes from averaging all of the different rows that relate to one particular perspective. So all of the goals or objectives related to customers, how are we doing on average? 87%. When it comes to finances and all the goals we have related to finances, we're doing on average 65%. So let's go back then to our blank one And let's talk about how this relates to the videos that we've been doing previously related to financial ratios. So if we are looking, for example, at Amazon, we could look at increasing our profitability. So you can see productivity and growth are listed here as dimensions. There are more dimensions than that. We're focusing here really on the fact that this is a financial perspective. So we want to increase profitability. How could we measure profitability? Well, we had a video where we looked at lots of different ways to evaluate profitability. And one way was we could look at the gross margin. So how do we calculate gross margin? We took our sales revenue minus our cost of goods sold, and we divide that by the sales revenue. So what we have here with our gross margin, when we looked at Amazon, and so you can go back to the videos where we did those calculations, I think we calculated what their gross margin was about 43%. Okay. Now, let's suppose that we are going to benchmark using the Industry Canada data for non-store retail. I keep mixing up those words. Non-store retail. So this is Amazon and the other 299 companies, large companies within Canada that do delivery and sale of goods, but don't have a physical location. Well, if we use the Industry Canada data from 2021, we see that the gross margin was 34.6%. So notice our current score is better than the goal. So how does that mean that we're doing? Well, we would take 43% divided by 34.6%, and we're doing awesome. We have a score above 100%. So when you're doing a scorecard, a higher number is better. Okay. We're trying to, in most cases, reach 100%. If we're already above 100%, then it's probably not something that we're really focused on in terms of trying to, in terms of goals, in terms of our strategic plan. We're already there. We're going to focus on something else. So here we can see their gross margin. They're already at more than the industry standard. At 43% compared to the rest of industry at 34.6. If we instead were going to compare to, let's say, the profit margin, okay, and when we looked back at the data for Amazon, so let's just go back. Okay, back to the beginning. Find our image for Amazon. All right, so we could see for Amazon that revenue of 116.4 billion, our gross profit here of 49.9. When you divide the two, that gave us that 40% gross margin that we just looked at. We want to look at here net profit. And compare that to our revenue. And you'll notice in this particular graph, they don't line that out. Why? Because they're trying to emphasize the fact that Amazon did not have profit in 2021. So let's just go and find the income statement for Amazon through our slides. So bear with me as I scroll. There's Google. Here's Amazon. All right, so here we have that net income of negative 3.8 billion and our revenue of 116,444. So we can take that negative 3,844, divide by the 116 billion. Okay. And what we get here in terms of a profit margin, of course, it's negative, is a negative 3.3% in terms of that profit margin. So let's compare that to the industry standard. How does the rest of the non-store retail do? And so we will go, so mind the scroll while I go back through our slides here. back to the work we did on our financial ratios. Let's go find the non-store retail. Here we have our net profit or loss, and we are going to compare it with that Amazon data. So since we're comparing the overall profit margin, we're actually going to look at total revenue rather than just from the sale of goods and services there. So 656.10 divided by 9,464.30. Okay. And so here we are looking at the profit margin across the industry at about 6.9%. While I am on this slide, you can see, of course, the industry gross margin that I was pulling there. And of course, you can also calculate that number by taking our, here we have our cost of goods sold, and we're comparing that to our revenue to get those numbers. So here we're focused on profit margin, so 6.9. So let me just scroll all the way back. All right, so if you're Amazon, you want to increase profitability. We're going to measure that by looking at the profit margin. Our goal is to match the industry at 6.9% or beat it, and we're currently sitting at a negative 3.3%. So what's our score? How are we doing? Well, we take negative 3.3, divide by 6.9. What you get is that our current score is a negative 48%. Not doing so well in terms of profit margin compared to the rest of industry. And so we'd go back and we look at our income statement and we'd say, okay, well, we had a lot of non-operating expenses. What was that? Is that something that's going to be happening again in the future? Is this just a one-time thing? How can we be more profitable going forward? So we use benchmarks to set the goal. We compare it to how we're currently doing. We find our score, and we can also find our mean performance by averaging the scores across a specific perspective. As we're looking at our scorecards, if we were looking at some of the other areas, we need to make sure when we build a scorecard that a higher score is better. So for example, let's suppose that we are focused on process and we are focused on safety. So our objective or our strategy is going to be to improve safety. All right, so how do we measure this? Well, if we used a KPI that said number of injuries, the problem is, let's say we did that, number of injuries. Our goal is 0. Our KPI to date is that we've had 10 injuries. The problem is the score becomes 0. Oh, sorry. Becomes 10 divided by 0, right? So what does this tell you? We need a way where a higher score is a better score. So instead of doing number of injuries, what you will see when it comes to manufacturing is that if they're trying to improve safety, the KPI is days without injury. The goal is 365. Then the question is how many days do we go without there being an injury? If we can go 200 days between injuries, then we can calculate our score as 200 divided by 365, and we get our performance here at 55%. Then if we can go longer than 200 days without injury, that score will go up. So higher score is better as you are creating your scorecard.